Hello and welcome to our training today on strategies for outreach and engagement in care as part of our training series on equitable and person-centered care. Pleased to introduce our presenters today. We are joined by Laura Collins of HMA, and then our partners and colleagues, Dave Leone and Rachel Chambers from Painted Brain, who bring up a lot of experience in these outreach and engagement strategies and what that looks like on the ground, and also how to integrate peers into this outreach and engagement process to make it more effective. So really be pleased to hear from all three of these presenters in our training today. Let's take a look at our agenda. So we have three major sections. One is overall principles for effective outreach, and then focusing on the engagement continuum. And then we will wrap up our discussion today with some practical strategies, both in general from outreach workers and then specific to what we're hearing about outreach and engagement in the care process. Our learning objectives are today is that you will have an increased ability to apply those best practices throughout the engagement continuum. Important elements, identify important elements of trauma-informed and harm reduction approaches to be used in outreach and engagement, and then identify those practical strategies to use. Major themes today will be persistency, flexibility, individual, keeping it person-centered. And so we encourage you to think throughout how you can apply, whether you're a seasoned outreach worker or you're new to outreach and engagement, thinking about how you can apply these practices and ideas and tips into your own work. So now I'll turn the time over to Laura.
Thanks so much, Patricia. So glad to be here with Painted Brain, with Dave and Rachel to discuss best practices related to outreach and engagement, really specifically related to engaging these individuals in the care process. So let's start with the why behind outreach and engagement and the general impetus behind this training. So when we've been talking with the counties that have already implemented care, we've definitely heard themes around both the challenges and creative strategies that the behavioral health teams are using in effectively engaging with the care respondent. So we heard many insights from the behavioral health teams that resonate with best practices that we'll be discussing today. So many of the themes are reflected on this slide. Generally, we're hearing about the importance of a person-centered approach that is not only trauma-informed and non-judgmental, but most importantly, flexible and creative. And today we'll also be talking about a few other themes, the importance of being patient, being persistent, being consistent, which really ties in with all of this work. So letting the person know you'll be back and when. We heard a bit about the importance of providing a team approach when engaging, and typically in pairs, importantly including a peer on the team, which again we'll discuss further with Dave and Rachel. We also heard from counties about their cross-collaboration efforts, for example, between counsel for the respondent and the county behavioral health teams, and supporting those initial outreach and engagement activities. And then finally, the teams have really been generous in sharing strategies. And in addition to today, we'll get a bit more in the weeds today on some of these effective approaches. So the blue box on the slide really reflects the key principles behind effective outreach and engagement that we'll touch on before we get into more specific practical strategies related to this work in care. Let's go to the next slide. So today we're really focusing on informal engagement strategies versus the more formal structured approaches, starting with what a person-centered approach looks like. So Dave, if you could speak to the importance of acceptance, respect, flexibility, and transparency as key elements of the person-centered approach when engaging their care respondent, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Laura. And it's an honor to be here with you all, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this training. So person-centered is something that we really focus on in the profession that I'm a member of, the social work profession. And we always have this saying of meeting the person where they are, where they're at. And what does that actually mean? Well, meeting somebody where they are is really about trying to respect and accept them as they are at the moment, not holding them to a different standard or an idea of what we wish they were, but really meeting them literally where they are, emotionally, where they are psychologically, where they are physically in the world, and being non-judgmental and deeply accepting. How do we demonstrate that? By listening, by making good eye contact, by meeting the person sort of physically at that level. So maybe if they're sitting on the ground, you might want to actually sit down on the ground with them, not too close, but not too far away, and demonstrate through your attention, through your care, through your empathy that you're really there with them and focused on their needs and their intentions. Moving on to flexibility, it's really important to be able to sort of recognize what is and isn't working in the moment. If you notice that you're not connecting with this person or it's a challenge, you want to be flexible and actually change your approach as needed. So you might go from serious to a little bit silly, or go from maybe lighter to more heavy to really match that person's emotional state at the moment and do the best you can to connect with them. Transparency is really about truly using yourself as you are, not trying to portray a certain persona or act differently than you present. Being okay with yourself, being genuine, being very present, being very honest about what you do and don't know. And a lot of times, if you get asked a question that you feel kind of stumped by, our natural tendency is to go to try to figure out like what's the best answer for that. But really, just being very genuine about the fact that I don't know that answer. I might need to look into that and talk to you about that the next time we meet would be a really genuine and honest and authentic way to connect with that person. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thanks, Dave. All right, let's go to the neast slide. So a person-centered approach is really also a trauma-informed approach. So just to recap, a trauma-informed care approach is a set of key principles that really promotes a feeling of safety, empowerment, true support, true collaboration, and of course, it embraces the principles of cultural humility and equity. A trauma-informed approach also means assuming that the trauma in someone's past may be impacting the way that they're responding to situations, and really how they may be responding to you, how they may be interacting with you. So, for example, a person may be standoffish because they have been traumatized by authority figures in the past. So a trauma-informed approach is really about shifting that focus from pointing the finger to what's wrong with you to, I'd like to hear what happened to you. So this slide really summarizes some of the key outreach and engagement strategies that a trauma-informed approach embraces. So just quickly, and then I'll hand it to Rochelle. We want to make sure that we're creating a non-threatening environment, a calming environment, be mindful of your body language, your tone of voice, your personal space. You want to, again, encourage a person-centered approach, thinking about, kind of avoiding that one-size-fits-all approach to outreach and engagement, essentially, but still using some common principles. We're going to hear throughout this, conversation today, building trust. So establishing rapport through consistent and honest communication, and be patient. Give individuals time to trust you, follow through on your commitments to them. And kind of in line with that, communicating clearly, simple language, check for understanding, avoid your jargon, really be explicit about what you're saying and why. And we'll talk more about this as well, using your active listening skills and your empathetic listening skills as well, without judgment, validating their experience, validating their feelings. And then again, another theme today is patience, right? Go at their pace. So be patient with folks that are, may have difficulty engaging due to their symptoms. So really just, again, working with where they're at. And then building community support. So this is really about part of the trauma-informed approach is really thinking about fostering those connections to other resources and support networks to help them really build their support system. And then just thinking about yourself with your trauma-informed approach, your own self-care. So thinking about, and we don't spend a lot of time on this, but this work is hard, and you really want to work with yourself and your staff in terms of self-care and promoting your own mental and emotional health to prevent burnout and compassion fatigue. Rachel, is there anything you'd like to add here?
Yes, as someone that has, experienced significant trauma, um, I have, taken a trauma-informed approach when, I practice in my peer support provision or when I'm wanting to receive services as a consumer. It's really important to me and how I show up and how I would like to receive services. And one of the key points is involving the consumer, the client in the whole process, the outreach process, the treatment process, the whole care process. Consumers need a voice in their own treatment and should play an active role in decision making. In traditional care models, clinicians often dictate the course of action without much opportunity for the client to provide feedback and actively engage in dialogue. But in a trauma-informed approach, the consumer really actively engages in that care, and their feedback drives the care plan. And particularly even in outreach, where does the participant want to meet at? You can even give them, opportunity just to provide insight into that, or what medications have worked for them and what have not worked for them. Just being able to create a safe physical and emotional space is very key, where they're supporting control and choice is important. And we believe that the key provision of service in here is peer support workers that can provide safety and hope for the consumer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's much of my feedback relative to providing a trauma-informed approach. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Let's move to cultural humility. So in our series on trauma-informed care, we also talk about the principles and approaches effective to outreach and engagement with regards to cultural humility, which is really about both centering and empowering someone else's experience and culture. So broadly, cultural humility looks like knowing and recognizing that others are the experts of their own culture, their own values, their own beliefs. And it's also about asking about their experiences, their knowledge, their resources that can be leveraged to support them. And of course, it's all about being collaborative and being flexible. So just think about how you could use cultural humility in your approach with outreach and engagement. So consider what racial, ethnic, and linguistic groups the individual might be a part of. Be willing to put your assumptions aside. Ask them to share their own experiences, their knowledge, their resources that you can support, related really to their health and well-being. And then use resources that broaden your understanding of cultures to these communities that you're serving in care. And also be aware of other characteristics, even including their trauma that we've just talked about that may have shaped their needs, their preferences, their beliefs, and how they're interacting with you. Communicate that positive attitude towards their culture, acknowledge your own limitations in understanding culture, even if you share cultural similarities. And then importantly, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, consider your biases that may get in the way of building that rapport with your outreach and engagement efforts, and think about ways you can mitigate that bias. Dave, is there anything that you want to add to this?
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. I appreciate the opportunity. I think that the sort of key or most important part of cultural humility is really knowing and being conscious of the fact that you have, going into this work, your own sort of cultural identity, your own sense of who you are, and to recognize that that's not the right one, the centered one, the correct one. It's just yours. And so as you start to engage with somebody that might be from your own culture, might be from a different culture, you want to recognize that you're trying to learn and experience their world from their perspective. and not compare it to your own or think that yours is the right one and theirs is the other one. In this case, theirs is the central cultural experience and cultural identity. And what you're trying to do is learn about that from their perspective. How would you do that? In my own words, I'd say that you actively value the respondent's self-knowledge and express curiosity. Try to learn from them. Try to see them as the expert and the most sort of aware person in the relationship about their culture that they come from. And try to recognize that you don't know. You might come in with your own biases or ideas, but you really want to invite them to share and try to learn actively from the person that you're trying to connect with, the respondent. You want to also be really open to learning about the respondents' own ideas about their culture, their identity, what groups they participate in or identify with, and be a active learner in that process so that you're really centering their experience above your own and welcoming their ideas in. The last thing I would say is that it's important for us to all do this work consistently and constantly on ourselves to try to learn about sort of what other cultures experience in the world, how they differ from our own. That could be about ongoing learning opportunities, reading the right books, exposing yourself to situations where you're not in the dominant culture yourself, or really being around people from other backgrounds and other experiences. And really just trying to embrace and be okay with the humbleness to know that you don't know everything. You're still trying to learn. We're all still trying to grow in this process. Thanks so much, Laura. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Dave, for adding to that. Let's talk briefly about harm reduction and that approach and how it really is critical to an effective outreach and engagement strategy. It really does align nicely with trauma-informed care, person-centered care, and really thinking about aligning with cultural humility as well. So broadly, harm reduction is really thought of as a public health strategy, sort of aimed at minimizing the negative consequences associated with various human behaviors, often related to substance use. But it really does apply to other behavioral health issues, including serious mental illness. And it's generally about approaching individuals without judgment and supporting them and supporting them where they're at. So harm reduction really means approaching someone from a place of supporting the individual's basic safety needs and well-being versus jumping right into treatment recommendations, especially before any trust or rapport has been built. So during outreach and engagement, think about ways you can incorporate harm reduction principles into your approach. So on the side, you see sort of engage first. So again, begin by establishing that connection with the individual, building trust through that genuine and non-judgmental interaction, listening, focusing on understanding the individual's experience and needs, showing empathy and validation through that active listening approach, respecting their autonomy, empower the individual by acknowledging their right to make their own choices and encouraging self-efficacy and personal responsibility. Acceptance is a huge part of harm reduction. So creating a welcoming and non-threatening environment, showing that unconditional positive regard, just again, accepting them where they're at. And then also kind of a component of motivational interviewing you hear about, not directing, but assisting or guiding. So offering support and resources rather than imposing those solutions, and collaborating with the person to identify their goals and their steps towards improving their well-being. And then finally, and really a key principle of harm reduction is promoting safety, right? So emphasizing strategies to reduce those immediate risks, ensure their safety, and it could be, related to their immediate situation and their environment, but also just being prepared to provide resources, information, and help them with their immediate needs to help them stay safe. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about mitigating bias, and I'll bring Rachel in a moment. It's really important with outreach and engagement when we need to check our bias. So just an overview, bias is generally a positive or a negative tendency that results in attitudes, decisions, behaviors, and actions that are prejudiced in favor or against something, or against a behavior or against someone, a person or a group, compared to another. So implicit bias is one form of bias that occurs unconsciously. So biases and the actions that we take based on these biases are really developed through our life experiences, through our cultural context, through our learnings, our teachings, and also through the media. So, that said, we're really hardwired to have a bias. It is a protective factor that is kind of a holdover from our early existence. Thinking about, being safe. We feel safe around people and things that are understood to us. Dangerous things are things that are unknown to us. So, obviously, while in an ideal world, we would completely do away with biases, we really need to recognize the human factor and work to identify and address these conscious and unconscious biases. So just kind of looking at, this slide, and I'll hand it to Rachel in a sec. It's all about taking that whole person approach, and versus relying on those stereotypes, and self-awareness, mindfulness of your own actions and your own behavior. Thinking about even your facial expressions and reactions and body language when we're communicating with folks. And really also being aware of those power dynamics that, can impact the other person's experience. So I'm going to hand it to Rachel to talk a little bit more about mitigating bias. Rachel?
Thank you. As you noted, Laura, assessing your bias on a consistent basis is very vital to becoming and staying an effective behavioral health professional. This can be done in supervision. It can be done in finding trusted allies to process the biases with. And there's various self-assessment surveys and tools that you can utilize to support that. We actually have a training, if you're interested on this topic on biases, where I talk a little bit more. And I go into my biases relative to religion and just in politics and how that can play into how we show up when we show up for respondents. So I personally have individuals where I process biases in a safe space. So I really would recommend us as behavioral health practitioners finding those safe spaces to process that and on a consistent basis and practicing. Just for example, at Painted Brain this last year, we really emphasized the importance of training on biases, particularly because of the needs of our population. They're very complex. As we talked about, many of our consumers might be homeless or maybe houseless. They might have poor hygiene and may act differently. Confronting that uncomfortability and processing that is very important to staying an effective practitioner and just a healthy and whole individual. So that's really just the two key points that I really wanted to emphasize. And if you want more support, please check out our trainings on biases. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Yeah, a lot to cover today. Let's just move before we transition to some, the engagement continuum. I have an ideas and action for you all. So just pausing for a moment on this, now that we've covered the core principles behind effective outreach and engagement, let's think about what strengths you could bring to the table. For example, the strength of lived experience that may help you connect with the individual. Also think about any weaknesses or areas to develop. So for example, if you have any trouble making that connection during a brief interaction, slowing down further, observing, allowing the person to feel comfortable with you, and being comfortable with yourself or in their presence. So I just want to prompt you, Dave and Rachel, to chime in terms of what some strengths you can bring or areas that you may want to overcome in terms of areas to develop.
That's good. Rachel, you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. For me, my strengths are my lived experience. I feel very comfortable, in downtown LA, meeting folks where they are, just because I've been hospitalized. I had just as involved experience. So me being able to show up is really like it's just like a second nature, because I'm navigating the system. And then I think what some of, like, as I talked about in the last trainings, like checking my biases, although I'm a Black woman and, I'm very conscious of different things, I still have privileges, I still have biases, and I, find ways to process that. As you know, I talk to Dave a lot, but yeah, I think, confronting my biases is an area, and how I show up when I'm engaging with our consumers is important. So yeah, Dave, do you have any other insights on your strengths and
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think of my own strength in this area is really being very flexible in my presentation of myself. I have a very natural tendency to kind of adjust my energy level and my sort of the intensity of my conversational style to match the person I'm talking to. So somebody that's very soft-spoken, I'll also be fairly soft-spoken. Somebody that's very high energy, I'll kind of match their high energy. And it's a very authentic and natural process for me. And I want to say that with the knowledge that if that doesn't seem like your sort of natural, authentic, genuine self, you want to be really true to yourself first before you try to sort of embody something else. Flexibility is obviously important, but you also want to be true to who you are. Um, I also have a tendency to really try to literally meet the person where they are. And as I mentioned earlier, if somebody's sitting on the ground on the cement, outside of a gas station downtown, I'll often just sit down on the ground with them and sort of literally level the playing field so that I'm looking eye to eye with this person and connecting with them at the most natural level possible. Um, some of my own weaknesses that I'm aware of, I grew up a Midwestern, middle class white guy. And so I have that sort of unearned overconfidence in myself that sometimes is attributed to white folks. And so I really want to be aware of the fact that I'm not I don't know everything. I want to be really open and humble about the fact that I might have some real gaps in my knowledge base about other people and experiences. And I want to watch for my own resistance in having self-doubt. It's really important as part of genuineness to be okay with the fact that you might not know everything, be okay with the fact that you might be uncomfortable. And so if I do get into a situation where I feel uncomfortable or feel like I don't know something, I don't want to act like I'm more confident than I am. I want to be really humble, really genuine, and really present with the person I'm working with. Thanks.
Ah, love that. Thanks so much, Dave and Rachel. Let's jump into the engagement continuum. So let's go to the next slide. So we are going to dive into what we're calling the engagement continuum. It's kind of a way to structure the conversation. So outreach, engagement, and retention. There really is a lot of overlap here. Engagement strategies are key to outreach. They're key to retention. But really, again, for the sake of structuring our conversation, let's walk through each component. So I'll hand it to Dave in a second, but just to kind of give a brief overview, the initial outreach is really about establishing that content, beginning to build rapport. This short-term connection is really crucial in laying that groundwork for the future work that you're doing with the individual. And then as engagement progresses, you're sort of maintaining that consistent communication and support. And it helps strengthen that rapport and foster that deeper connection. And then, everyone forgets about retention. So long-term retention really does involve, sustaining the relationship and really, really brings continued engagement strategies to the work to promote those better long-term outcomes. So we'll talk about all three components, but I'm going to hand it back to Dave on the next slide to introduce a case example. Dave?
Thanks so much, Laura. So we're going to talk a little bit about Marcus. He's a fictionalized character, but we'll illustrate some of the aspects we might see in our care court respondent outreach. Marcus is a 46-year-old veteran who is experiencing schizophrenia and is currently houseless. Marcus served in the Army for over 10 years, and so that's a big part of his history. But we don't know about how important that is to him. We really want to follow the sort of visual cues. Is he wearing something that indicates his service or not? And try to attend to that. Marcus experiences post-traumatic stress disorder, which leads to some hypervigilance, which really sort of emphasizes the importance of trauma-informed care. To recognize that some of the behaviors you're seeing from him might be more due to the trauma he's experienced than his actual reaction to you as an individual. He also has some medical challenges around hypertension and chronic pain from old injuries. Marcus has used alcohol to cope with his daily existence and has been inconsistent with use of prescribed medication, which includes both psychiatric medications like antipsychotics and antidepressants, but also applies to his medical needs and sort of the medical medications that he's using for hypertensives and for the sort of pain issues that he's had. It's Marcus's brother that submitted the petition for the CARE Act. And so it's really important to think about, and we'll talk about this in the engagement process, the outreach process, like how to incorporate that information. Outreach workers have noticed recently that Marcus's symptoms of schizophrenia have been increasing and worsening. He's increasingly hypervigilant and guarded. And so that's something that we know ahead of time before we actually meet with him on the street. In the next slide, we're going to move into actually talking about preparation for outreach. So it's really important to think about what the goal here is when we try to prepare to meet somebody out in the street or in a new environment. The main goal is to know that all of this work is based on the relationship that we're able to develop with the respondent. Can we develop a trusting, safe, and a supportive relationship with the person? And so as you prepare for outreach, before you actually go out and try to meet the person, you want to get as much background information as you can from the other sources available. That might be really carefully reading the petition itself to understand what it is that's the challenge for a person like Marcus and what you can know about Marcus as a person from that petition. You also want to coordinate with other organizations that are working with Marcus. So if there's another outreach team or mental health team or even medical team that's working with Marcus, use them for their knowledge. Like, what is Marcus driven by? What is he curious about? How does he respond to people? What might gain his interest? And then the final group of people that we might want to talk to are the people in his family or the person that wrote the petition themselves. What can we learn from those people about Marcus's tendencies, curiosities, interests, and sort of interactional patterns? One of the best things we can try to find out at this stage is to get a sense of what kinds of incentives or things that we can give to Marcus on the first meeting that might help establish that trust and safety and connection. So it might be about not just grabbing a snack, but actually grabbing a snack that you have a sense that Marcus will like based on the information from the other folks that you've talked to, or bringing a bottle of water, or if you know and can find out that Marcus has a dog, maybe you should bring some dog treats. Another thing to consider, which might not appeal to everyone on this that is hearing this training, but is Marcus a smoker? And if so, maybe it'd be useful to actually bring some cigarettes so that you can at least have a 5-minute conversation while you're hanging out with him while he's smoking a cigarette that you just gave him. And again, the overall goal here is to really sort of know as much as you can about how best to connect with this person on the street before you go out and outreach to him. In the next slide, we'll actually be talking more about once you're on the scene itself. What you want to really do is not sort of pull up and then rush up to this person and be like, hey, how's it going? You know, who are you? What's going on? You want to take a moment and calm yourself, check in with yourself, get a sense of where your sort of anxiety levels or comfort level are with this environment, and then see what you can about the environment that they're in. You don't want to just rush up on the person. You want to notice things about, first, what's their environment like? Are they sitting in front of a gas station? Are they in a very busy area? Are they in a very isolated or desolate area? What's around them, and what is their daily experience of the world based on? And how intense is the scene that they're in? You know, is it crowded and intense? Is it very quiet? Is it quiet and intense in some other way? Then you want to think about what are you observing about the respondent himself or herself or themselves before you approach them. What are they trying to demonstrate to the world? Are they wearing very intensive jewelry? Do they have obvious tattoos? Are they wearing a t-shirt that you might be able to comment on? Are they wearing dog tags, which might be indicating a real value about the fact that they've been in the service in the past? Or are you seeing, even if you know that this person's been in service, are you seeing no obvious indication that they've been in the military service at all? That might indicate that that's not an area of comfort or an area to approach. So you want to really judge and kind of guess at what you can observe and think about this person, and ask them really personal and targeted questions about what you're observing, what might get their interest, what is it that they're trying to demonstrate to the world around them. You also want to, again, with the trauma-informed approach, think about and prepare yourself before you approach. This person might distrust me, they might be rude to me, they might act like they don't even hear me, and be okay with that before you approach the person. Prepare to be rejected, prepare to be challenged, prepare yourself for the fact that this person's not going to immediately take you into their world and invite you to be a part of their life together. How am I responding to this person? What are my automatic reactions? And what am I aware of in terms of just observing this person before I approach them? How can I center myself and calm myself down before I do that actual approach? How comfortable am I in this space? These are all important things to think about before actually making the connection, which is in the next slide. So we've done our observation, we've done our background research and preparation, and now we're actually trying to make that first connection. So it's really important to start with where they are, as we said earlier. That might be a question of, hey, how's it going? How are you doing today? You want to introduce yourself, but you want to keep that kind of light. And you want to really listen to the person's answer. When you ask a question, make good eye contact, give them time to respond, allow them to respond in the way that feels the most comfortable to you and to them. And then, is there anything that you can identify that's an immediate need for this person that you might develop the trust or help them see you as a person that's committed to helping them out? Part of that is just active listening, paying attention, being calm, being present, being genuine. But part of it is also trying to address, like, what is it you need right now? Do you need to get off the street? Do you need food? Do you need safety? Do you need to vent about something? How can you try to attend to their immediate needs to start to develop that connection? As we said earlier, it's really important to prepare yourself with the right sort of incentives. So does the person need a bottle of water? It might be good to have some options available to you so that you can actually meet their immediate need and make that connection, show that you're there to support and care. If the person is resistant, as they likely will be because they don't know who you are, don't ask questions over and over again, or don't push for an answer that they seem to be uncomfortable giving. If the person is resisting a specific question or set of questions, just move on and let that person take their time to get to know you before they really answer that. The last thing I'd say about this is that you're really trying to see the world from their perspective. A lot of this is about joining, about trying to see the challenges they're facing as something that you're joining with them to face together, as opposed to having a challenge in between you. You want to see it from their perspective and see what they're struggling with in their life. Let's move on to the next slide. De-escalation is a very complicated process, and it's something that you want to prepare for, and you want to be sort of ready to act on with this person. It's very possible that this person might get aggravated or upset that you're talking to them. It might not be an auspicious day to make that connection. And so these are just a couple of very basic topics. This is something to explore further on your own if you want to. But I'm going to give some thoughts about sort of how to de-escalate this person the best you can. The first thing is to really respect their physical space and not get closer if they're getting more upset. You want to give them some space. You want to keep your body language very calm and collected. You don't want to cross your arms. You want to stay with an open stance and have an open expression on your face. You want to be empathic, non-judgmental, and accepting, and demonstrate that as best you can. Non-verbal communication is a really important part of this, and the kind of comfort that we try to develop on ourselves is going to be translated to that person. So you want to try to stay very calm and in touch with yourself. The next thing you want to think about is really validate whatever feeling they're having. Yeah, it makes sense that you're frustrated or upset. It makes sense that you're angry. You don't trust me. You don't know who I am. Like, why would you trust me right off the bat? So you want to validate whatever it is they're experiencing and try to think more about the emotions that they're expressing than the content of what they're saying. Because the emotions are real, even if the content might be more hallucinatory or something that they're experiencing on the inside. You want to join with them to face the challenges they're facing together. And you really just want to not create any conflict between the two of you, but actually try to face the conflicts they're facing from their perspective and join with them on that process. If the respondent, the person you're trying to connect with, is challenging you, asking you a lot of questions, don't take the bait and fall into an argument with this person. Try to let them express their frustrations or their distrust or their connection, and don't take the bait of their challenging questions directed at you. If they get insulting, let them insult you. It's okay. Just start to absorb it and take that in the best you can. It's always important to offer silence and to be respectful of that person's sort of emotional needs and need for time to respond to you or to answer questions. It's also really important to always offer a lot of choices. Even if the choices are very limited, it's really important to try to start with the best option and give some options so that that person feels empowered to make decisions on their own and recognizes you as a person that's going to support them in making their own decisions and saying what they need in the world. The last thing to think about here is to really recognize that not every day is the best day to connect with this person. If the de-escalation is not working, if the intensity level stays high, it's okay to just say like, hey, this isn't the right day. I'm going to take off. I'm going to leave, but I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to come back at a future point and maybe we can connect again. It's always okay to walk away and try again another day. Thanks so much. Let's move on to the next slide. Here's some tips from outreach workers that come from actual outreach workers that are doing this work actively on the streets in different parts of California. We've worked closely with folks from San Diego specifically. It's really important, as I said earlier, to be authentic and genuine. Be yourself. It's really okay to be uncomfortable, and it's really important not to try to demonstrate comfort when you're not comfortable. If you're anxious, be anxious. If you're uncomfortable, be uncomfortable. Don't try to act like you're safer or braver or have more bravado than you actually do at the moment. That really feeds back into the idea of genuineness. Allow the person to mistrust you, and allow the person to have their feelings towards you. You don't want to overstate your understanding of their situation or act like you know what's going on for them. So you want to stay away from statements like the ones on the screen. I know what you're going through. I understand what you're dealing with. I've been there too. These things might feel true to you, but they don't really connect with the person. They're not genuine. They're not meeting the person where they are. So it's more important to suggest that you want to understand, you're wanting to join with them, but that you don't know what they've been through or don't know how they experience the world. Be responsive, not reactive. So don't get defensive. If you notice yourself getting defensive, take a breath, take a step away, think about your body language, think about your presence, and try to calm yourself. Again, pause before you start responding, and really think about how you're trying to react. If you know that you have specific triggers or things that are going to upset you, try to be aware of those ahead of time, and be aware that if you get triggered, it might be important to step away or take a break or take some time. And don't try to push through it. Know your own limits. Know your own challenges. Be okay with who you are as your good self, and be attentive to what you need as well. Don't assume that you know what's going on for this person, and always give with the idea that you're being generous with your time, your attention, your care, without expecting to be validated or gratified through their reaction to that. So you might be very kind, very sweet, very gentle, and they might react with aggressiveness or frustration or distrust or just a lack of eye contact. It's important to be okay with that and not try to push them to respond in the way that you want them to. So you want to practice emotional generosity. You give support without expecting to be validated or supported back in the reaction that they have. If they do react really well to you, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too. It's important to just be okay with how things play out. Now we're going to move on to trying to work on the next stage of this, which is really about building rapport and the engagement process. So I'll pass it back to Laura to talk us through that.
Thanks, Dave. Again, so much overlap here. But yes, we're kind of moving now into the engagement phase of the continuum. And again, like we mentioned, these phases really do blend together. They're fluid, and the strategies you may use in one phase would be appropriate in another. But, as we discuss these concepts, think about how you could engage with Marcus, that, initial case example that Dave presented. So I'm going to hand it back to Dave to get us started with that engagement part of the continuum. Dave?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. Building rapport and connectedness, really working with that engagement process and developing the relationship that you're going to have with this person on an ongoing basis can be broken down to a couple of different areas. There's the verbal techniques, psychological techniques, and nonverbal techniques that are all vital to this. So we're going to move into the next slides and talk about each of these in more detail. Let's move on to talking about verbal techniques. All right. Laura is very experienced in the ORS process, so I'm going to pass it back to her to talk about the left side of this slide, and I'll jump back in for the authentic communication. Thanks, Laura.
Sure thing. Yes, it's always important to kind of touch on those motivational interviewing. We also call them MI skills or reflective listening skills, critical skills in supporting engagement and building rapport. And so I'm just going to briefly touch on ORS. So ORS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizing or summaries. And just a quick overview of the open-ended questions, such a critical component of engaging with someone because you really do want to encourage a dialogue, a conversation. So open-ended questions really start about asking about who, about what, about when, where, how. Tell me about is often what I start a question with, versus kind of a question that prompts a yes or no answer. So it's really, again, starting the conversation and getting more accurate information and getting to know them. Closed-ended questions are really not conversational starters. They can stop the conversation in some ways. So asking, what is your living situation like, or versus, is this where you're living? Affirmations are really an important part of motivational interviewing in the sense it's kind of like a lot of these skills. It's kind of showing that you're listening. So it's a specific acknowledgement of a strength or a success. It's sort of a compliment, but again, articulated in a way that shows that you're paying attention to what they're talking about. For example, you may say after the conversation, "You're clearly working hard to connect with your daughter." So just really kind of a compliment in the sense that you're reframing what they've just talked to you about. Reflections are really critical as an active listening or motivational interviewing skill. Really, reflections are kind of about paraphrasing or rewording or reflecting back what you just heard. Again, another skill that demonstrates your listening, right? So it's also a way to sort of check back that you're on point in terms of what they just said. It's also a validation of what the individual's feelings may be about a topic. For example, you may just reflect back, you know what, I'm really hearing that you're feeling overwhelmed right now. We often start reflections with, what I hear you saying is, so it's just it's a little bit of a skill to develop, but it's a very important skill. And once you develop it works great in a conversation. Just to keep it going and show them that you're listening and also checking in that you're on, the same page in terms of what you're hearing. And summarizing is a similar skill. Again, demonstrates your listening, and it's also checking that you're understanding. I use it also as a redirection skill. Often when we're finishing sort of, or I'm working to finish, a conversation and or an assessment, a component of assessment, I'll summarize that conversation and then check it with them. So, let me make sure I understand you. You'd like to talk with your housing coordinator about a problem you're having as soon as possible. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing? So it's a nice way to just sort of check against, what they're saying. I'm going to pass it to Dave here to talk a little bit more about that authentic communication skill and fostering that. Dave?
Thanks so much. Fostering authentic communication is not about telling somebody that you're authentic and genuine, because that's going to actually kind of convey the opposite. You want to demonstrate authenticity, not say that you're authentic. And so how do you do that? You show up with good eye contact. You stay patient and attentive to what that person's experiencing. And you want to try to demonstrate that you're listening, that you care, that you're actually taking them seriously and taking what they're experiencing seriously. Another part of that is really thinking about what you're bringing to the table. So, you don't want to have your cell phone out and like look down at that while you're talking to this person. You definitely don't want to have a clipboard out where you're taking notes on what the person's saying. You want to be very genuine and present and authentic in your interactions. And so you want to be making sure that you minimize any distractions and try to stay as focused and attentive as possible. Um, Part of that is also about really making eye contact to demonstrate that authenticity and attention and care and sincerity. Um, you want to, I think one of the best skills we can develop in this profession is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it's okay to feel awkward. It's okay to feel like there's a sort of unspoken silence or confusion. Try to stay calm. Try to allow yourself to feel uncomfortable or awkward, because you're trying to be comfortable with the fact that things are awkward. This is a new relationship or a very early developing relationship. And there are going to be moments where it feels a little strange, awkward, unnatural, or uncomfortable. So try to be comfortable with that to the best of your ability. If you do need a moment to think about like how to respond to a question or a thought, and you need to be silent for a moment, it's probably good to narrate that silence so that you don't just clam up and seem like you're sort of disconnected by saying something like, wow, I really am moved by what you just said. And I just want to take a moment to think about that before I respond too much. Or, wow, I'm really flooded with a lot of thoughts right now. And I'm just going to be silent for a moment to really think about how best to respond to this because I take this very seriously and I care about you. So narrating your own silences might be really helpful in this case. Let's move on to talk about some psychological techniques as well. So the first quote on here is really an important one to pay attention to. We all have a tendency in this profession, especially, to try to take care of things and fix things. And so resisting that reflex that we have to right the situation, to fix the situation, to have solutions is important. You want to sort of resist that urge and stay with the person in the present moment. Don't try to fix things. Definitely don't try to correct that person if they're saying something that doesn't feel true or genuine or inaccurate to you. Just let them be where they are. You want to validate the feelings without challenging the content of what the person's saying. A lot of the people that we meet through Care Court and through this care outreach are people that have schizophrenia. They might experience hallucinations or delusions. And so they might talk about things that are very real to them, but that don't really necessarily match what your sense of reality is. And so you don't want to comment on or challenge the person's beliefs or ideas or hallucination experiences. You want to think about the feeling that they're having in reaction, because that feeling is very real for them. So validating the feeling, the emotional expression is a great way to sort of stay connected and move through that process. You want to earn trust over time. We've talked about patience quite a bit in this meeting, but it's really important to be recognizing that trust takes time, that you need to earn that trust over time. And part of that is actually about listening and paying attention. Part of it is following through on what you say you're going to do. So you want to be very thoughtful. If the person's asking you to make commitments to things that you can't commit to, try to be genuine and honest about that. I can't commit to that. If you promise something and then realize that later on that you weren't able to fulfill that promise, don't just wash it under the bridge, but actually address that. Hey, last time I saw you, I said that I would be able to bring you, a gift card so that you could go to Ralph's and get some groceries, and I wasn't able to do that. So I want to apologize and recognize that I promised something that I wasn't able to fulfill. And I want to hear your feelings about reaction to that. I want to be very thoughtful in the future about not making promises that I can't continue or actually meet in the future. You can't rush the trust. You can't rush this person to be accepting of you or to move faster than they are able to with their sort of gradual development of trust and commitment to working with you. So you want to really allow the person to come to you at their own pace and don't pressure them to make you feel successful or make you feel like you're doing a good job. If things don't go well, it's okay to sort of plan another visit and recognize that today might not be the most auspicious day to make this connection. Um, so I'll be back in a couple days, and I'll be as specific as possible and be specific about what you can provide. If there's something that they can identify that you might be able to bring with you the next time, try to offer that and try to connect with them through that. Wow, I can see that you're really hungry today. Is it okay if the next time I come to see you, I bring a snack? Yeah? Okay, cool. What would you like? What kind of snack can I bring that might, demonstrate that I'm here committed to you and trying to connect with you the best I can? So there's a lot of psychological techniques. We're going to move on now to some nonverbal techniques for how to connect and engage with the respondent and develop that relationship. So it's really important to have a lot of nonverbal ways of spending time with another person and really be as specific to the respondent as possible. With Marcus, it might be about getting a sense of like what works best for him in terms of spending time with other people. Does he like to play card games or board games? Is he really interested in chess or checkers? Try to find ways that might actually allow you to spend time together that are not based on communication or verbal communication, but really on shared experience and shared space. It might be about bringing drawing materials or writing materials so that you can invite him to draw with you or even draw sort of simultaneously, or possibly draw on something and pass it to him and have him draw something and pass it back to you so that you create that interchange. Again, a very nonverbal but really positive technique for connecting. Some people are much more comfortable communicating and talking when they're on the move. So you might want to suggest like, hey, maybe we'd communicate better and feel better between us if we were actually taking a walk while we talked. So maybe walking around the block or taking some time that way might be a good option as well. Or listening to music together, getting a sense of what this respondent's favorite kind of music is, and then listening to them, asking them about their responses, or just nodding along and trying to appreciate the moment that you have with them. Silence is often very intense for all of us. And I think that, as I said earlier, it's important to try to develop some comfort with silence, with just being together, being in the same space as this person, and allowing them to acclimate to you as opposed to trying to force them to acclimate to your needs right away. So try to be comfortable with silence and try to be okay with being quiet together. Think about how the environment is affecting you and this person. So if you notice that the environment is very activating for you, it might be activating for them. It might be very comforting for them. So you don't want to make assumptions, but you do want to keep that as an open conversation. Wow, this is a very intense space for us to be meeting. Would it be better if we met somewhere like a park or around the corner where there's a little bit less people? Maybe that'd be a better option for us to develop this relationship and connect with each other. Or maybe this is the right place and I need to adjust to what feels good to you. So it's important to be flexible, to be present, to demonstrate that genuineness and authenticity, and to not act like you know things that you don't know. You're literally trying to get to know this person and help them get to know you as well. So thank you so much. Does it for nonverbal techniques.
Thanks so much, Dave. So many amazing tips and strategies in terms of engagement. And now we move to on the continuum to retention. And just coming back to Marcus, our example. So you've been thinking about building that trust and rapport with Marcus through that effective outreach and engagement. So let's think about how you might be able to build on that to retain Marcus and services. So I'm going to hand it to Rachel to talk about maintaining the connection. Rachel?
Yes. Maintaining the connection is very key, and retention is a critical piece to the engagement continuum. All these activities that we just discussed does not stop once the respondent agrees to participate in care. So all the strategies and approaches that we've been discussing specifically are really key to maintaining the connection. And we'll talk a little bit about them, particularly demonstrating genuineness. Dave and Laura talked really about, coming as you are, being your genuine self. This includes being transparent, as we discussed before, being realistic, and meeting the person where they're at. Remembering life details is really important, about the respondent, and being curious and continue to be curious, particularly like, for example, with Marcus. You could say, the last time we met, you were telling me you had a dog. Do you have any other pets? What's your favorite animal? You can also, use examples when it relates to continuing the connection, including, for example, you mentioned your buddy Joe last time. Have you talked to him in the last couple of weeks? When's the last time you talked to him? So maintaining curiosity and encouraging supports is really important in continuing retention and engagement so that the respondent actively, successfully participates in care. And last, is following through with your promises. Dave talked a lot about being transparent about and not over promising. You can just be cautious and use discernment in making guarantees, as we noted. Particularly, a good model that we heard is that you under promise and over deliver. That's one of the biggest things that the team have mentioned. So I believe that those are really important. Just because the respondent is not actively participating, you can really engage them in connection through making the connections, following through with promises, maintaining the curiosity, and that will encourage them to participate more and maintain their participation in care. And next, we'll go a little bit more into shared decision-making, which is also important about retention and maintaining the connection. As a person with lived experience, it's really important that I have shared decision-making with my clinical team. Because of my trauma and because of all the things I went through, it's really important for me to feel like I have, some sense of shared decision-making in my process. And so one of the definitions that I found was really key about shared decision-making. And it was defined as an approach where clinicians and the clients share the best available evidence when faced with the task of making decisions, and where the client is supported to consider those options to achieve informed preferences. So I believe that using a shared decision-making model is effective to building and maintaining a therapeutic support. We want our clients to be fully engaged in care. And to do this, they need to be informed and be a part of the decision-making. The clients will be managing many decisions, and you can help validate those feelings and work through them one by one. Saying that, for example, you could say, there's a lot of things to think about. What do you want to think about today? For example, with Marcus. Marcus has some health concerns, including hypertension, chronic pain, and an alcohol disorder. Does he want to work towards addressing those health issues? Does he have quality of life goals or activities that he can no longer do because of his health issues? His brother filed the petition to participate in care. Does Marcus want to foster those relationships with his brother and other family members? So really supporting the participant in developing the next steps in their own goals and taking action, and words matter. So the way you communicate is important, and using clinical jargon and being less formal are keys, and matching the way you communicate, as Dave said. Those are really important to when you're really trying to employ shared decision-making and really engage the respondent in their care. And I trust, as somebody that is a consumer of services, if you engage a person in making some decisions, even if they're small, that is a win. So I just want to encourage you all to learn more about shared decision-making and employing that in your practice. Next, we'll go to the next slide. Ideas in action. So I'm going to bring Dave in here, but I'm going to pose the question. Think about Marcus. How could you seek to build trust and rapport throughout the outreach, engagement, and retention continuum? We talked a lot about each section, but summarizing it, how do you think we can do that?
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. I think to prepare for the outreach, I think it's really important to do the homework that's available to you. So read the petition, talk to the other agencies that are working with Marcus already, talk to his family, get a sense of what interests him, what sort of drives him, what his communication style is, and how best to make that connection. Observe before you approach. Try to take in the environment, take in what he's demonstrating to the world. Is he wearing dog tags, or is he wearing a T-shirt that refers to his Army time in service, or not? That's an important sort of piece of information to try to understand in terms of how to connect with him. Um, in the engagement process, it's important to try to, as Laura said earlier, really remember what you've talked about in previous conversations. So bring back information. Rachel mentioned this also. If he mentioned having a dog that's not there with him, ask about the dog. If he's close to family members, ask about his relationships with them and how they're developing. Demonstrate that genuineness and care by demonstrating through the questions that you ask and how you attend to things that have come up before. You're also trying to find ways to spend time with this person non-verbally. So what are the games or music or activities that he likes to do that might allow you to have a better relationship or more deep relationship? Is it about playing cards? Is it about taking a walk, listening to music? Is he curious to hear music that you might want to bring to the table? Try to find ways to connect non-verbally. In retention, I think that there's really an ongoing challenge to try to get a sense of like what is working and what's not working. And just to reflect on what Rachel had just said about shared decision making, one of those decisions might be about how best to connect. So it's really important to ask, like, is there anything that I could do that would help you feel more comfortable with me? Another aspect of this in retention and in an engagement process is to own your mistakes. If you had a major empathic break, if you said something that offended the person, if you sort of misremembered something, own that and be okay with it and readdress it. Because a lot of times repairing challenges that have come up in relationships is the best way to strengthen a relationship and build it towards the future. That's part of humbleness, genuineness, and authenticity. Thanks so much. I'm wondering, Rachel, do you have other thoughts about outreach, engagement, or retention that we want to sort of bring back to light?
No, I think you hit them all. You hit every stage by key points: outreach, engagement, and retention. So now I'll turn it over to Laura to talk about some common team roles.
Yes, practical strategies. Actually, we will start with common team roles as well. But really, it's getting a little bit more, digging in a little bit more into the care specific discussion related to this work with this population. So yeah, so generally we've been hearing that teams are based on either the assertive community treatment or ACT model or full service partnership or FSP models. And really what that means is, these teams are typically multidisciplinary and set up to provide this wraparound approach and including after hours support. So these are teams that are truly responsible for outreach and engagement in the field as needed. And they're really teams that are set up to serve the more acute, more complex clients that may have had, historically difficulty engaging in treatment or care. And that's why these teams are sort of identified as the best teams to support this particular population. So the roles listed here in the blue box are kind of an example of what may comprise an ACT or an FSP team. And really the important point here is that this is a team that works closely together. They coordinate daily, and they're planful with how they're doing their outreach. So they may have a social worker or a licensed mental health counselor as their case manager or their clinician. It's really important that these teams have a prescriber. It could be a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist. A really important key player is a peer support specialist on this team. And a lot of teams we're hearing have community health workers that are, in fact, persons also with lived experience. So really bolstering the team with individuals with lived experience. Some teams actually coordinate with a homeless outreach team, or they have a homeless outreach worker on their team. So we hear from some counties about IHOT teams. I think that stands for in-home outreach team, to help make that first contact, to do really that front end work in terms of the outreach and building that initial rapport and trust. And then, of course, teams have other ancillary providers. There might be SUD providers, a substance use disorder counselor. There could be a nurse to really attend to medical issues. There could be a housing navigator on the team. So the teams really are fluent and flexible in terms of who's there. The idea is it's a wraparound approach. It's a multidisciplinary team. There's after hours accessibility. And honestly, it's all about when you are outreaching this individual, thinking about how you're doing it as a team, maybe as a pair. And what we've been hearing from counties is that a lot of teams go out in pairs and they include a peer on that outreach team that's going out, and then they identify, sort of who makes sense to provide that initial engagement, on the outreach pair team, essentially. So we definitely are hearing a lot of feedback about going to engage individuals in a pair or in a team of sorts, and being thoughtful about who's on that team when you're doing the outreach. And then I'm going to hand it back to Rachel to talk a little bit more about the peer role on outreach and engagement in care. Rachel?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Peer outreach and engagement and care, I believe, and we believe as a state, with SB 803 being passed, is really critical to bringing individuals into whole recovery care. The peer teams are critical when outreaching and engaging with the care team for the respondent. It's important. Some of the strategies that we found to be important was before strategizing, prior to you going out, letting the respondent choose who to talk to is really important. Peers also can build rapport before discussing the CARE Act. Even when we talked about earlier, just, asking, being curious about the respondent, noticing things about their shirt, or if there's a dog tag, just discussing, anything outside of the courts, and supporting immediate needs. If there's some water or some snacks, peers definitely can be that in between, really to just support the respondent into addressing those immediate needs. And then connecting on the lived experience. As someone with lived experience who's had justice involved experience and been hospitalized, really, it's good that, people can talk to me that haven't been through it, but folks that have talked to me, I really make that connection. And that is really what helped me when I was having a really severe episode of mental health challenges. So really, I believe the lived experience really brings in that whole, to bring the person in. And then explaining their rights and providing basic information. The peers can do that, just because, especially if a lot of us have navigated the system, even though it's not, a criminal system, we still have navigated the court system and can bring a lot of, basic information on the process. As well as we can work with teams in supporting longer term care. We really support the Therapeutic Alliance with the care team, and peers are really strong at that. And then because we have the ability to meet people where they're at, and we can also provide regular check-ins. When I was getting peer support, when I was in treatment for severe, mental illness, it was a peer that was there for me that was able to answer those calls and be more accessible. So I just want to encourage you all to utilize peers in this process, and then really just not just utilize them just as, an outreach worker, but really engage them in the whole continuum of the care process and treatment process will be really optimum for achieving therapeutic goals. And now I'll hand the slide over to Dave to talk about engagement.
Thanks so much, Rachel. So engagement takes time, as this slide indicates. I think it's really important to sort of know that and recognize that before you even start. The key issues that you've heard from us, the key topics and methods are about patience, persistence, and consistency. It's really about quality over quantity. It's about being curious and creative and staying attentive and bringing in your sort of genuine self and your genuine care and curiosity about the person you're trying to connect with. You want to always try to understand what the respondent, the person you're trying to connect with, what are their goals? What are their ideas about success, and what is their definition of success? You want to sort of pull the clinical or the treatment or the care team to really match that person, as opposed to trying to pull them into what the care team or you as a clinician or outreach worker think is best for them. You want to let them take the lead and be the guide in that process and adapt to what they see as important. You want to really recognize this is about your rights, and it's about really bringing your voice to the decisions that are made on your behalf and giving you as much decision-making power as possible. So you want to think about that respondent's strengths and support their self-efficacy and advocacy. You're helping them literally advocate for themselves, or you might be advocating on their behalf for their interests, not for what you think is best for them, but what they think themselves and what they want out of the world, what their goals are. You want to always be identifying new means of engagement. So you want to stay creative, you want to stay present, you want to stay thoughtful about what you can bring to the table and how you might connect best. What's worked in the past, what might be a new way to sort of add to that or extend that conversation or connection. Try to be conversational, try to be okay with silence, try to be okay with awkwardness, and really always think about client-centered and direct approaches to really meet that person where they are, join with them in their struggle, and see the challenges they're facing as a shared challenge that you're joining with them to face together, as opposed to a challenge that you have in between you. You're always trying to work on the client's timeline, and maybe even trying to adjust or help the treatment team or even the care court itself recognize that this person is moving at a different pace than we are moving ourselves, and we want to match their needs and their timeliness and timeline, not try to help them match ours. I want to invite Laura in to also mention another collaborative process that we've been involved with in this learning and training process. Laura, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. I just kind of jumping onto what you talked about, the court timelines, Dave. We are hearing from counties that they're working with the courts on, being really transparent with the courts in terms of their engagement activities and where they're at, and asking for continuances and extensions. And the court has, with the cohort 1 counties, has been responsive to that. So that's kind of exciting that we're talking about this, persistence and patience and all that, and how does that work with the care court timeline? And what we're hearing is the courts are being responsive to that, to really support the individual's engagement in care and in the treatment. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about some practical tips, basically, considerations, and then just additional tips. And I just want to call out briefly Department of Mental Health with LA and the UCLA partnership with DMH. They have a training series, and we've referenced some of that content here today. And they did highlight some of these same practical tips that we're calling out. So we want to think about location. So you want to think about taking into account safety for both you, for the individual, the respondent, and then just pre-planning around that as well. Might be your route and getting there. You also want to think about with regards to location confidentiality and if this is what can you say in this particular space with that individual? Always something to keep in mind. And also think about the individual might not have a phone, so or maybe inconsistent access to a phone. So just planning with the individual when and where to meet, and and one of those quick wins could be getting them a phone, actually. And then thinking about time of day or day of week. Really, the theme here is client preference, right? Setting up a consistent time, day, location, and then, sort of presenting that to them. I'll be here every Wednesday. Does that work for you? Is there a better location? Also thinking about, that you're informed in terms of that referral information. We may have talked a little bit about, making sure when you're preparing for outreach, like we talked about earlier, looking at all that referral information, looking at the petition, reaching out to the petitioner, so that you can get as much information as possible before you get out there and know what their preferences are when you are meeting with them, and what to expect essentially, and really prepare you with that for that interaction. And then, another really important component is, we're hearing that a lot of folks that are eligible for care have co-occurring substance use disorder issues. And so thinking about that realistically in terms of when is the best time to meet with those individuals. So it might be the morning, in terms of thinking about when you can best engage with someone when the substances might not be on board, as we might call it, for those of us that are clinicians, just depending on the substance. So it's something you really want to think about when you're working with someone that is actively using. And then also dress code, just, obviously comfortable, casual, not heels, obviously, not intimidating clothing, not wearing a uniform or a badge, and just thinking about the community that you're entering. So really kind of fitting in a little bit with your dress. And then also so important, we've talked about this, your outreach partner. So thinking about, what that particular visit is going to be about, and who you should be partnering with. So say you're further along in engagement and you might be actually wanting to talk about medications, you might want to bring a prescriber with you. So just being really thoughtful. And also, as Dave mentioned earlier, we really do want the individual to choose who to talk with. So thinking about who are they most engaged with that you can join with in terms of that visit as well. And we've talked plenty about outreaching in pairs versus a larger team. Such an important approach with this population. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll be super brief because this is really information that is uploaded also in notes, but just thinking about that toolkit that you want to bring with you. And again, this is almost a recap. Maybe some other items here that we haven't mentioned is, bringing some items for the individual who may have received their petition. They may need a large envelope. They may need a calendar. Just some tools for them in terms of managing that process. And also another thing that we've heard about is contact info. How can I reach you? We've heard about a bracelet, like those rubber kind of Live Strong bracelets, with your contact information versus a card that you would share with the individual. And the other items here are very important and also just sort of basic components of a good outreach toolkit: hygiene packs, personal protective equipment, naloxone or Narcan. But again, we've talked about those kind of bringing things that also meet their immediate needs as well. And then let's go to the next slide. Lessons learned on the ground. And really just kind of recap what we've been hearing from counties and kind of what we talked about today as well. Collaboration has been really important, and part of the pre-planning process in terms of the collaboration. So really reaching out again to the petitioner, reaching out to the public defender, and really other providers that can help make that outreach really stick, really, you know, build that team so that you are also building that relationship with the individual. And again, engaging with the petitioner. I think we haven't emphasized that enough. And often petitioners are individuals that know the person best. The family member could be a roommate, but just getting a little more information and helping you best engage with the individual. And then the other thing we've heard today, and we've heard from the counties, is have a peer on the team. They have been critical to facilitate that authentic engagement, and just be thoughtful about, you know, that the role of that individual in on the team, and the role of that individual on the continuum of outreach, engagement, and retention as well. The other big theme we've heard from counties is persistence and patience, and also redefining success. We've heard counties talk about, you know, 10 times they've tried to engage with someone, and finally the 11th time they've engaged with someone for 10 minutes, and it was over, you know, music. And that was a win. And to the outsider, that might not be, but for that team, wow, they finally made a connection with someone, and they found a way to connect with that individual. So not giving up, redefining success, and having that persistence. And then trauma-informed approaches, harm reduction approaches, using cultural humility. All of this is, you know, pervasive throughout being successful in successfully engaging these individuals. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pose a question to Dave. Dave, thinking about the different counties and their unique needs, different needs of the care populations, you know, what considerations might you adopt that we discussed today? So, you know, looking at the bullets here: cultural considerations, outreach toolkits, and adaptations that the teams might want to make to increase engagement. Dave?
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. To recap a little bit of thought about cultural considerations, I think you want to recognize we all have a natural tendency to think that our cultural background and identity is the correct one or the right one, and really try to decenter that and think about the fact that you're trying to connect with somebody possibly from a totally different culture, that they're the expert in their culture, that their culture is absolutely as valuable or to be honored by you as the outreach worker. So be really thoughtful about how to honor and invite that person to help you learn about them, about their experience, their background, and their sort of worldview, and recognize that that is a valid and honorable experience for them as well. In terms of an outreach toolkit, I think it's really important to think about what you're bringing to the table. First of all, you're bringing yourself. So you want to be centered, you want to be calm, you want to be aware of your own sort of comfort level, and you want to be very genuine. So if you're anxious, don't act like you're not. If you're uncomfortable, it's okay to look a little bit uncomfortable. What you want to do is try to acclimate the best you can to the environment that you're meeting this person in, and recognize that they're going to take their time to acclimate to you as a new person in their life. Another thought here, as you're going out in teams, is to recognize that you might be thinking that you're the one that's going to connect with this respondent, but then recognize that the respondent is responding way better or more connectedly to your partner. So you want to defer to that partner and let them take the lead. Another thought I have on that is that if you're trying to introduce somebody new to this team and you already have a good, well-established rapport and connection with the respondent, use that trust to share it with the other person. Hey, it's good to see you again, Marcus. I'm so glad to meet up with you. I'm bringing along this other person that I really trust that you don't know, but I trust them. And so I'm hoping that you might give them, some grace and recognize that they're a valuable person the way I do. So use that trust and share it with others. Um, what adaptations can your team make to increase engagement? You want to stay creative. You want to stay thoughtful. You want to remember things about this person and what they find important and reference them back. And last of all, you want to really own any mistakes or disconnections or misalignments or misattunements you've had. Because actually repairing relationship breakdowns or ruptures in the connection or in rapport is one of the best ways to strengthen that rapport and connection and trust. So own your mistakes, be okay with the fact that you're a fallible person just like everybody else, and really bring yourself to the table with an open, honest, and genuine presence. And you're likely to do really well with this work. Um, and I really appreciate the time to chat with you all and share some of our knowledge with you. I want to uplift the collaboration that we've had with UCLA and DMH, who've worked together to sort of help bring this process together. And thank you again, Laura, for inviting me and Rachel to be a part of this training.
Thanks so much, Dave. I think I'll hand it to Patricia to close us out.
And thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. So just wanted to recap our learning objectives. The goal is that by the end of the session, you'd better be able to apply those best practices that Laura started with throughout the engagement continuum, and then identify important elements of the trauma-informed and harm reduction approaches that can be used throughout outreach and engagement, and identify those practical strategies to use throughout the outreach continuum with the pair population. I wanted to highlight a few next steps. Please reach out if you have any questions. If you're a county and you have a county liaison, reach out to them with clarifications or questions. You can also reach out to our email if you don't know where to turn, which we can share on the next slide. Rachel, Dave, Laura referenced other trainings that we've done. Certainly, please feel free to look at the meeting or the presentation materials, which links to the references and articles and trainings that we reference throughout. Here are 3 specific trainings that would be good to review as the next step: the role of the peer in the care process, trauma-informed care training materials for County BH, and then that addressing implicit bias for behavioral health agencies. There is no wrong door, so let's show you where to go. If you have questions, you can go on careact.org for our training resources and materials. Also, send us an email if you don't know where to go or you have a question. Let us know, and we can route you to who may be able to help. Thank you to my partners, and thanks for joining, and we'll talk soon.